To be given a second chance at life is a miracle. For architect David Chen, that miracle came in the form of a new liver, an experimental transplant that saved him from certain death. But gratitude soon curdled into terror. The organ didn't just save his life, it brought another one with it. David begins experiencing vivid, fragmented memories that are not his own, of another family, another life, and a violent end. He must now unravel the mystery of his anonymous donor, confronting the horrifying possibility that he didn't just receive an organ, but a consciousness that is slowly, methodically overriding his own. Let's begin the story, get comfortable, and listen closely. The scent of their home had never been so potent. It was a clean, sterile smell, a mixture of lemon-scented cleaner, fresh laundry, and the faint, woody aroma of the architectural models that dotted their living room. For David Chen, it was the smell of survival. 3 weeks ago, that scent had been replaced by the acrid, metallic tang of the ICU, a place where the air itself seemed to hum with the quiet desperation of failing bodies. Now, he was home. Frail, yes, a roadmap of angry purple scar tissue bisected his abdomen, a constant, tender reminder of the abyss he'd been pulled from. But he was alive. Easy does it. Anna's voice was a soft anchor in his still foggy world. Her hands were gentle on his arm as she helped him settle into the plush armchair by the window. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny, ordinary miracle. "I'm okay," David murmured, his voice still raspy. "Just tired." "You're allowed to be tired," she said, tucking a blanket around his legs. "You practically came back from the dead, you know." She smiled, but her eyes held the lingering shadow of fear, the memory of sleepless nights spent in a sterile hospital waiting room. He had been a case study in catastrophic luck, a sudden non-alcoholic liver failure that had blindsided doctors. His body, once the reliable vehicle for his sharp, logical mind, had simply decided to quit. He was days from the end, slipping down the transplant list when the call came. A perfect match. An anonymous donor. The procedure was experimental, facilitated by the brilliant, almost a mythically renowned surgeon, Dr. Elias Vance. A new technique, Vance had explained in his calm, clipped tones, one that promised faster integration and lower rejection rates. David and Anna signed the paperwork in a desperate, grateful haze. Now, in the quiet aftermath, relief was the dominant emotion, a warm tide that washed over the trauma. Anna brought him a mug of coffee. It was her special blend, the one he loved, rich, dark, with notes of chocolate and cinnamon. He lifted the mug, the familiar weight a comfort. He took a sip, and the world tilted on its axis. It wasn't coffee. It was a violent assault on his senses. The raw, burning taste of cheap whiskey flooded his mouth, so real he almost gagged. It was followed by the acrid, cloying ghost of cigar smoke, thick and stale, filling his throat. The sensation was absolute, a complete sensory override. He choked, sputtering, the mug rattling in its saucer. "David, what is it? Is it too hot?" Anna rushed to his side, her face a mask of concern. He blinked, and it was gone. The whiskey vanished. The smoke dissipated. All that remained was the pleasant, familiar taste of his coffee and a racing heart. "No, it's nothing," he lied, his mind scrambling for a logical explanation. "Post-op meds, I guess. My taste buds are all messed up." Anna accepted it, her brow furrowed but willing to be convinced. It was the most plausible answer. His body had been through a chemical and physical war zone. Of course, there would be collateral damage. But the incident left a strange residue of unease. That night, sleep offered no respite. It was a chaotic slideshow of alien imagery. His dreams were no longer his own meandering narratives. They were sharp, disjointed clips, like frames cut from someone else's home movie. He saw a small, dimpled hand, a child's hand, reaching for a much larger, calloused one. His hand? No, the fingers were thicker, the nails bitten. He heard a melody, a simple, haunting lullaby sung by a woman's voice, a tune he'd never heard but which felt achingly familiar. "Go to sleep, my little bear, the moon is watching in the air." He saw a ceiling, not the smooth, white expanse of his own bedroom, but a water-stained, cracked plaster ceiling with a cheap, dated light fixture. He felt the phantom sensation of a mattress that was too soft, dipping in the middle. He woke up with a gasp, the lullaby still echoing in the silent room. Anna slept soundly beside him, her breathing even. He lay in the dark, his hand instinctively going to the tender scar on his torso. He was grateful, so incredibly grateful to be alive. But for the first time since the surgery, a new, cold question slithered into his mind. What exactly had they put inside him?
The glitches, as he'd started calling them, remained confined to the fringes of his consciousness for another week. A phantom smell of sawdust while reading a book. A fleeting, inexplicable sadness while watching a comedy. He dismissed each one, a new brick in the wall of denial he was building around himself. They were neurological ghosts, the aftershocks of trauma and powerful anti-rejection drugs. He was an architect. He believed in structure, in logic, and things that could be measured and explained. This was just noise, until the noise became the signal. He was standing in their kitchen, watching Anna chop vegetables for dinner. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump of the knife on the cutting board was soothing. He was telling her about an idea for the new library project he was itching to get back to, his mind finally feeling clear enough to think about blueprints and support beams. "So if we use a cantilever design for the second floor reading nook, we can create this incredible floating effect," he was saying, his hands moving to sketch the shape in the air. And then it happened. The world didn't fade or blur. It was switched off and replaced. One moment he was in his pristine, white and steel kitchen, the scent of garlic in the air. The next, his vision was completely, utterly different. He was standing on a cracked concrete floor, slick with a dark, iridescent sheen of old oil. The air was thick with the smell of gasoline, rust, and damp earth. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sickly yellow pall over a cavernous, grimy garage. In front of him was a car, a beast of a thing, a vintage muscle car, maybe a late 60s Charger, its body the color of dried blood, half draped in the dusty tarp. His hands felt rough, coated in a fine layer of grease. He could almost feel under his fingernails. And deep in his chest, a feeling bloomed, hot and fierce, a possessive, almost feral pride. My car, my project. The vision lasted for maybe 5 seconds, an eternity. It vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. He was back in his kitchen, stumbling backward, his hand flying to his head. The clean, bright room felt alien, the smell of garlic sharp and foreign. He was dizzy, nauseated, a profound sense of dislocation washing over him. "David," Anna's voice cut through the ringing in his ears. She had stopped chopping, the knife held midair. "Are you okay? You just stared into space for a second. You look like you saw a ghost." He stared at her, his wife, her face etched with worry. How could he explain that he had? Not a ghost, but a whole solid, greasy piece of someone else's life. I just felt dizzy," he stammered, leaning against the counter for support. The lie tasted like ash in his mouth. After that, the floodgates opened. The flashes became more frequent, more vivid, and terrifyingly mundane. He'd be brushing his teeth and suddenly experience the memory of standing on a rickety wooden porch, watching a purple-black thunderstorm roll in across a flat, open field. The smell of rain on dry dirt was so real he could taste it. He'd be trying to log into his work email, and his fingers would instead feel the memory of expertly, flawlessly tying a complex fishing lure, the nylon line cool and slick against his skin. He, David Chen, who got seasick in a rowboat and had never held a fishing rod in his life. The most disturbing flashes involved people. He was sitting on the sofa next to Anna, her familiar scent filling his senses, when he was sideswiped by the memory of a different woman's head resting on his shoulder. He could feel the specific weight of her, smell her hair, a cheap apple-scented shampoo, and feel a surge of comfortable, lived-in affection that was utterly, undeniably not for Anna. He couldn't hide it anymore. The wall of denial had crumbled. That night, sitting in the dim light of their living room, he told her everything. He told her about the whiskey, the garage, the fishing lure, the other woman. He watched her face as he spoke, saw her initial concern morph into a deeper, more alarming alarm. David, honey, what you went through was immense. A near-death experience is a massive trauma. This sounds like a form of PTSD. Your brain is trying to make sense of the gap, the time you almost lost. It's creating things to fill the void. No, Anna, he insisted, his voice rising with a desperation that scared them both. It's not my life. It's someone else's yesterday. Or, she added gently, her hand finding his, the drugs, the immunosuppressants, they can have rare neurological side effects, hallucinations, vivid dreams, even memory confusion. We need to tell Dr. Vance. We need to get a professional opinion. He nodded, clinging to her words. A medical side effect. That was logical. That was solvable. It had to be. Because the only other alternative was that he was going insane or something far, far worse. The follow-up appointment was in a wing of the hospital David hadn't seen before. It was all polished chrome, frosted glass, and hushed, expensive silence. Dr. Vance's private consultation office felt less like a doctor's room and more like a CEO's boardroom. There were no anatomical charts on the walls, only abstract art. Dr. Vance sat behind a vast mahogany desk, a picture of tailored clinical authority. He listened to David's account with a practiced stillness, his fingers steepled, his expression unreadable. David detailed the memory flashes, the sensory overrides, the growing feeling of a foreign presence in his own mind. Anna sat beside him, her hand gripping his, lending silent support. When David finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Dr. Vance finally leaned back in his leather chair, which sighed softly. Mr. Chen, what you're describing, while distressing, is not entirely unheard of. We classify it as a form of anesthesia-induced confabulation, compounded by post-operative stress. Your brain has undergone a significant trauma, both physically and psychologically. It's fabricating narratives to patch the holes. Think of it as a form of cerebral scar tissue. But it feels so real, doctor, David pressed. The details are so specific. The smell of the oil in that garage, the tune of a lullaby. The mind is a powerful and often unreliable narrator, especially when under the influence of the Cacrolimus regimen you're on. It's a powerful drug. It saves your life by suppressing your immune system, but it can play tricks on your perceptions. What about the donor? Anna asked, her voice firm. Could this be, I don't know,
Some kind of cellular memory? She'd been up all night, tumbling down internet rabbit holes of fringe science and transplant anecdotes. Dr. Vance's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of something, annoyance, tension, crossed his features before being smoothed away. Miss Reed, the concept of cellular memory is a fascinating trope of popular fiction, not a recognized medical phenomenon. The liver is a filtration organ, not a repository for consciousness. He steepled his fingers again. As for the donor, I'm afraid I can't help you. Our protocols regarding donor anonymity are ironclad for the protection of both families. It's the law. His tone was final, a steel door slamming shut. He wrote a prescription for a mild sedative and recommended a therapist specializing in post-operative trauma. The dismissal was polite, professional, and absolute. They left the office with the pamphlets and a profound sense of being gaslighted. David felt a cold knot of dread in his stomach. Vance was hiding something. His denial was too smooth, his deflection too quick. The bleed, as David now thought of it, intensified. It was no longer just about memories. It was about behaviors. He was sitting at his drafting table one afternoon, frustrated with the design, and found himself whistling. It was a complex, jauntier tune, a folk melody full of intricate trills. He stopped dead, pencil hovering over the paper. He had never been able to whistle more than a simple, tuneless puff of air. The melody was alien, yet it had flowed from his lips with the ease of lifelong practice. He started using phrases that were completely out of character. Arguing with the contractor on the phone, he snapped, "Don't you try to sweet-talk a shark," a bizarre, folksy idiom he'd never heard, let alone used. Anna, who was in the room, just stared at him. Then came the cravings. He, a man who prided himself on his taste for craft IPAs and Belgian ales, was suddenly consumed by a desperate, gnawing need for a can of Pabst Blue Ribbon. The craving was so intense, it was like a physical hunger. He finally gave in, buying the six-pack and cracking one open in the kitchen. The cheap, watery taste should have been repulsive. Instead, it tasted like relief. It tasted right. Anna watched him drink it, her face pale. She said, "David, you've always said that stuff tastes like battery acid." "I know," he said, looking at the can in his hand as if it were a venomous snake. "I don't know why I'm drinking it." The emotional bleed was the worst part. The memories now came with a powerful emotional payload. A flash of a little girl with pigtails laughing on a swing set was accompanied by a wave of such fierce, protective love that brought tears to his eyes. Love for a child he didn't have. He saw a brief image of a man's smirking face, a stranger, and felt a surge of simmering, hateful resentment that made his fists clench. These weren't his feelings. They were echoes, psychic residue left by another soul, and they were beginning to stain his own. He was a vessel, filling up with someone else's life, drop by terrifying drop. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. David was half asleep on the couch, a book lying open on his chest. Anna was in the other room. The house was quiet. He drifted in that space between wakefulness and sleep, and then he was plunged into ice. It wasn't a memory, it was an assault. He was no longer in his living room. He was in the garage. The muscle car was there, uncovered, gleaming under the harsh light. The air was cold. There was shouting. Not his voice, but a rougher, deeper one, raw with anger. "You think you can just walk in here? After everything?" Another man's face, snarling, contorted with rage. He didn't recognize him. There was a shove, hard, against his chest. He stumbled back, hitting something solid and metallic, a tool chest. The smell of stale beer and another man's sweat. The feeling of pure, unadulterated fury rising in his throat, a fury that was not his own. He felt the other man's fist, connect with a jaw. The jarring impact vibrated up his arm. Then a sharp, blinding pain exploded in his side, a brutal kick that stole his breath. He doubled over. Another shove, harder this time. His head snapped back, connecting with the concrete floor with a sickening, wet crack. Pain. Overwhelming, all-consuming pain. And fear. A cold, liquid fear spreading through his limbs as a warm, sticky wetness spread from the back of his head. He saw his own hands, the donor's hands, covered in blood, reaching for nothing. The face of his attacker loomed over him, a mixture of panic and grim satisfaction before turning and fleeing. The garage door slammed shut, plunging the world into darkness. David came to with a violent, full-body convulsion on the couch, gasping for air. A scream was trapped in his throat. Anna was kneeling in front of him, her hands on his shoulders, her own face a mask of terror. David! David, wake up! You were seizing! He was shaking uncontrollably, drenched in the cold sweat. But it was the other sensation that paralyzed him. A real, phantom pain was radiating from his side, a sharp, stabbing agony originating directly from the side of his transplant scar. He clutched at it, groaning. The scar wasn't just a mark of healing. It was the epicenter of the wound that had killed the man whose liver was now inside him. The terror was finally eclipsed by a cold, hard certainty. This wasn't a side effect. This wasn't a delusion. He had just witnessed a murder. His donor hadn't died in an accident. He was killed. A new feeling pushed through the fear, a grim, determined rage. He was no longer a passive recipient anymore. He was a witness. The memories weren't a curse. They were clues. The scar wasn't a wound. It was a map. The next few days, he became an obsessive detective. He abandoned his architectural work, turning their clean, modern home into an incident room. He bought a large corkboard and pinned it up in his home office. He began to sketch, his architect's hand giving form to the ghosts in his head. He drew the layout of the unfamiliar house, the porch, the grimy garage, the bedroom with the water-stained ceiling. He drew the vintage muscle car in painstaking detail. He drew the face of the woman from the memory, the one with the apple-scented hair, her features soft and worried. He drew the little girl from the swing set, her pigtails flying. He drew the face of the assailant from the violent memory, his features coarse and angry. His search became clandestine, frantic. He knew the exact date of his transplant. That was his starting point. Late at night, with Anna asleep, he sat at his computer, a grim voyeur of his donor's final days. He scoured local news archives, police blotters, and online obituaries from that specific week. He searched for unexplained death, accidental fall, John Doe, cross-referencing them with keywords from the flashes: garage, mechanic, vintage car. He was digging for a ghost, sifting through the digital remains of the dead, hoping to find the man who was currently living inside of him. He found him on the third night of his obsessive search, buried in the digital archives of a local county newspaper. The headline was small, unremarkable. Local mechanic dies in apparent accidental fall. The date was 2 days before his own surgery. David's blood ran cold. He clicked the link. The story was short, barely 100 words. Michael Kovic, 34, was found dead in his home garage by a neighbor. The preliminary cause of death was ruled as head trauma consistent with the fall. The police had stated there were no signs of foul play, but the case remained open pending the full coroner's report. And then he saw it. Below the text was a single grainy photograph of the house, a small, unassuming bungalow with a sagging wooden porch. The same porch he had stood on in his memory, watching the thunderstorm roll in. Michael Kovic. The name landed in his mind like a stone in a quiet pond. It wasn't just a name, it was an anchor, a key. Saying it aloud in the silent room felt like an incantation. Michael Kovic. Knowing the name seemed to change everything. The fragmented, chaotic flashes began to coalesce, to form longer, more coherent narratives. It was as if his brain, now having a file name, could finally access the complete files. He was no longer just seeing snippets, he was experiencing episodes of Michael's life. He saw Christmas morning, the floor littered with wrapping paper. He felt Michael's arm around a smiling woman. Rachel, that was her name, Rachel. He watched Michael's daughter, Lily, maybe 5 or 6 years old, gleefully riding a new red tricycle around the living room. The wave of pure, uncomplicated joy he felt was so potent, it was dizzying. But the darkness was there too. He experienced a memory of a bitter argument with Rachel in the kitchen, the air thick with tension over a stack of unpaid bills on the table. He felt Michael's shame and defensiveness, his frustration at not being able to provide. He felt Michael's growing paranoia, a memory of him peering through the blinds at a car parked across the street, his heart pounding with the fear David couldn't understand. The love for his family was real, but so was the pressure, the mounting debts, the quiet desperation of a man sinking. He had a name. He had a life. He had a motive. He printed the news story, the picture of the house, and his sketches of Rachel, Lily, and the attacker. He laid them out on the dining room table, like a prosecutor presenting his case. He called Anna into the room. She stood at the edge of the table, her eyes moving over the strange collage of evidence. He explained it all, his voice steady and low, pointing to the news article, the photo of the porch, the date. His name was Michael Kovic, David said, his voice trembling slightly. He didn't fall, Anna. He was murdered. I saw it. I felt it. Anna stared at the papers, then at him. The color drained from her face. This was no longer about PTSD or side effects. This was something else. Something impossible and terrifying. The man she loved was standing in front of her, presenting evidence of a murder he had witnessed through the eyes of a dead man. She was caught in an agonizing trap, suspended between the insane, impossible truth and the crippling fear that David was having a complete, complex, psychotic break, constructing an elaborate delusion to escape his own trauma. David, this is crazy, she whispered, her voice breaking. Is it crazier than me suddenly craving his beer, whistling his songs, knowing how to tie a fishing lure? Look at the evidence, Anna. Please, just look. Their relationship, once a bedrock of love and support, was now straining under a weight it was never designed to bear. He saw the doubt in her eyes, the fear of him, and it was a pain sharper than any phantom kick to the ribs. He was losing her. He was losing himself, and the only way back was to follow Michael Kovic's ghost to the very end. The change accelerated. It was no longer just a mental invasion. It was a physical one. David, who had always stood with the straight-backed posture of an architect, conscious of form and structure, found himself adopting a slighter, more pronounced slouch when he wasn't paying attention. It was Michael's posture, the posture of a man who spent his life hunched over engines. He was signing a delivery receipt one afternoon and glanced down at his signature. The elegant, sharp-angled David Chen he had practiced for years was gone. In its place was a messy, hurried scrawl, the letters looping and indistinct. He stared at it, horrified. He took another piece of paper and concentrated, forcing his hand to form the familiar shapes of his own name. It felt unnatural, like writing with his non-dominant hand. Michael's messy script was now his default. The mirror became his enemy. He would catch his reflection out of the corner of his eye and freeze. For a terrifying split second, the face looking back wouldn't be his. The jawline would seem squarer, the eyes a shade lighter, a pale hazel instead of his own deep brown. His own face, the one he had known for 32 years, would then snap back into place, but the afterimage lingered, a chilling reminder of the tenants refusing to pay rent. The terror of it was profound. This wasn't a haunting. A haunting is external. This was an overriding, a cellular coup d'etat. He finally understood what Dr. Vance had so coldly denied. The liver, a central processing hub for the body, a vast filter for every drop of blood, wasn't just filtering toxins, it was broadcasting. It was flooding his system not just with memories, but with the biological and psychic blueprint of its original owner. The organ was terraforming his body, cell by cell, into a landscape it found more familiar. He wasn't just remembering Michael Kovic, he was becoming him. The realization brought with it the final, missing piece of the puzzle. He was in the shower, the hot water beating down on him, when the memory surfaced, not as a chaotic flash, but as a clear, linear, and horrifyingly lucid sequence. He, Michael, is in the garage working on the charger. The side door creaks open. The man from the violent memory steps in. His name is Marco. Michael feels a jolt of anger and fear. Marco was his former business partner, a man he owed a lot of money to, a man with a vicious temper. "You've been dodging my calls, Mikey," Marco says, his voice deceptively calm. "I'll have your money, Marco. I just need more time," Michael pleads, wiping his greasy hands on a rag. The argument escalates quickly. Marco's greed, Michael's pride. It's not just about money, it's about betrayal. Marco lunges, not to fight, but to grab a wrench off the workbench. "I'm taking the car. It'll cover what you owe." Michael sees red. The car is his one hope, his one piece of himself. He shoves Marco away from it. The fight begins. It's clumsy, brutal, a desperate struggle on the oily concrete floor. Marco is stronger. He kicks Michael hard in the side, right where David's scar now sits. The pain is electric. Michael stumbles back, disoriented. He gives him one final, furious shove. It's not meant to kill, just to end the fight. But Michael is off balance. His feet slip on an oil patch. He falls backward, his head hitting the corner of the heavy steel workbench. The wet crack is sickeningly loud in the small space. Marco freezes, his face a mask of shock and panic. He stares down at Michael, at the blood pooling on the floor. He hadn't meant for this. He checks for a pulse, finds none. He panics, wipes his prints from the wrench, and flees, slamming the garage door behind him, leaving Michael Kovic to die alone in the dark. David collapsed against the tiled wall of the shower, the water turning cold around him. He wasn't just an observer anymore. He knew. He knew it wasn't a deliberate, premeditated murder. It was manslaughter, an argument gone horribly wrong, covered up to look like an accident. He knew the killer's name. He knew his face. And he knew, with the certainty that chilled him to the bone, what Michael Kovic wanted. The knowledge of how Michael died presented David with a terrifying crossroads. Two paths diverged in his fragmenting mind. Path one was the path of self-preservation. He could go back to Dr. Vance, armed with this irrefutable, impossible knowledge, and demand help. Perhaps there was a drug, another experimental procedure, something that could suppress this mnemonic invasion, sever the psychic link to the organ that was devouring him. It was the logical choice, the sane choice. But it felt like a betrayal. It felt like erasing Michael, letting his killer walk free and silencing the last echo of a life unjustly taken. Path two was the path of the ghost. He could embrace the fusion, use the knowledge that was not his own to settle a debt. He could find Marco. He could get justice for Michael. It was an insane, dangerous idea, but it felt right. It felt like the only way to appease the furious, grieving consciousness that was staging a hostile takeover of his body. Maybe, just maybe, If Michael's restless spirit found peace, it would finally let him know. He looked at his hands, at the faint tremor in them, and made his choice. He knew from Michael's memories where Marco worked, a grimy auto body shop on the industrial side of town. He didn't go to the police. What would he say? I have the memories of a dead man in my liver? They'd commit him before he finished the sentence. This was a debt he had to pay himself. He told Anna what he was going to do. She was terrified, but the doubt in her eyes had been replaced by a grim belief. She had seen the changes in him, felt the shift in his very presence. She refused to let him go alone. They drove to the auto body shop in the late afternoon. The place smelled of paint thinner and welding fumes. David's heart, or was it Michael's, was hammering against his ribs. He saw Marco standing under a car lift, wiping his hands on a rag, the same way Michael had in the memory. David and Anna walked in. Marco looked up, his expression shifting from mild curiosity to guarded recognition. He didn't recognize David, but he recognized Anna from the periphery of Michael's funeral. "Can I help you?" Marco asked, his eyes darting between them. David stepped forward. He didn't feel like David Chen, the architect. He felt a different energy coursing through him, a righteous, borrowed anger. "We need to talk about Michael Kovich," David said. His voice was steady, but it had a rougher, lower timbre than usual. Michael's timbre. Marco's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" David took another step. "You were business partners. He owed you money. You went to his house that night to take the charger." Marco's eyes widened in shock and fear. "Who are you? How do you know that?" "You argued," David continued, the memories flowing through him, clear as day. He was channeling Michael now, letting the ghost speak. "You shoved him away from his car. He kicked you, right here." David jabbed a finger into his own side at the exact location of his scar. Marco flinched as if he'd been struck. "You pushed him." David's voice grew louder, filled with Michael's fury. "He slipped on the oil patch by the workbench. You heard his head hit the corner. You heard that crack. You checked for a pulse, you panicked, and you ran." He delivered the final blow, an intimate detail no one on earth could know. "You left him there to die in the dark, and you still have his lucky wrench, the one with the handle wrapped in black electrical tape, in the bottom drawer of your toolbox. Don't you, Marco?" Marco stared at him, his face crumbling. It wasn't the face of a cold-blooded killer, but of a weak man cornered by a ghost. He was looking at a stranger who was speaking with his dead friend's voice, armed with his dead friend's final moments. It was impossible. It was supernatural. He broke. As Marco began to sob, confessing everything in a panicked, blubbering torrent, David felt a seismic shift inside him. It was an agonizing, overwhelming purge. It felt like every one of Michael's memories, the joy, the love, the anger, the fear, was rushing to the surface at once. A massive wave of psychic energy cresting and then crashing out of him. He staggered back, clutching his head, a guttural cry tearing from his throat. The world swam in a vortex of disjointed images. Lily on her tricycle, Rachel's smile, the roar of the Charger's engine, the taste of cheap beer, the feeling of bleeding out on cold concrete. And then silence. He fell to his knees, utterly drained, gasping for air. The rage was gone, the fear was gone. The presence, the constant hum of another life in the back of his mind, was gone. Anna rushed to his side, holding him as he shook. The garage was quiet, save for the sound of Marco's weeping and the distant siren Anna had called the moment he confessed. For the first time in months, David Chen was alone in his own head. The aftermath was a blur of police statements and legal proceedings. Marco was apprehended, his confession absolute. The case of Michael Kovich's accidental death was officially reopened and closed, the truth finally recorded for posterity. David explained his knowledge by claiming to be a distant relative who had pieced things together through old letters and conversations.
a lie so flimsy it should have collapsed. But in the face of a full confession, no one questioned it too deeply. He confronted Dr. Vance one last time, not in his office, but by phone. David calmly recounted the entire story. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy and damning. Finally, Vance spoke, his voice stripped of its usual confidence. "Our procedure," he said, his words carefully chosen, "appears to have unforeseen mnemonic side effects." A week later, David read a small press release stating that Dr. Vance's experimental transplant program had been indefinitely suspended due to a need for further ethical review. The silence in David's mind was the new normal. The memory flashes were gone. The phantom pains, the cravings for cheap beer, the borrowed skills, they all vanished. He was himself again. He could sign his own name. He saw his own face in the mirror. But he was fundamentally changed. The experience had carved something out of him, leaving a hollow space that he could feel. His relationship with Anna was different too. It was deeper, forged in the crucible of a shared, impossible secret, but also more fragile. They would sometimes look at each other across the dinner table, and he could see the memory of it in her eyes, the lingering question of who or what she was truly married to. Months passed. Life found a new, quiet rhythm. David was back at work, his mind clear, his designs sharp and focused. One Saturday morning, he was in his home office, poring over blueprints for a new community center. The sun was warm on his back. Anna came in, holding 2 mugs. She set one down on his desk beside him. It was her special blend, rich and dark. The smell of survival. He picked it up, took a grateful sip, and smiled at her, the love he felt for her clean and uncluttered. "Thanks, Rach." He stopped. The name was out before he could catch it. A single smooth syllable. A bolt of pure ice shot down his spine. He tried to laugh, a dry, cracking sound. "Whoa, Freudian slip. Sorry. I was just thinking about the project." He corrected himself, his voice too quick, too loud. "Thanks, Anna." She had frozen, her hand still on her own mug. She stared at him, her eyes wide with a familiar, rekindled horror. He forced a smile, but they both knew. The ghost was gone. The rage and the trauma had been purged. But in the quiet, scarred tissue of his new life, a single, indelible imprint had been left behind. Not a memory of death, but of the deepest love. A fragment of Michael Kovich's soul forever embedded next to his scar. A quiet reminder of the man who had given him a second chance and taken a small piece of him in return. He looked at his wife, his smile faltering, and in the profound, terrifying silence between them, he knew he would never truly be alone again.